Let's talk about how to tell a story. You know, best speakers are always the best storytellers. Great storytellers are the ones who have advanced civilization since the beginning of time. Many cultures are completely dependent on stories to convey the lessons, the wisdom from one generation to the next. So the better you become as a storyteller, the less you have to worry about being funny, or the less you have to worry about coming up with a technically perfect speech. Because once the story is good enough and delivered well enough, the audience will remember it long, long afterwards. I've encountered people in the airport as I travel who have said to me, "Excuse me, aren't you Jim Cathcart?" "Yes, I am." "I saw you in St. Louis, Missouri 30 years ago, and I remember you told a story about," and then they relate to me one of my stories. Wow! What an honor to have the impact of something like that, to affect somebody in a way that they would remember for decades the message you delivered. See, it's not just the story they remember on a deeper level what the story means. If the story is profound enough, then it will carry on, right? So like the story of Santa Claus on Christmas Eve, coming around with his reindeer and his sleigh and giving out gifts. You know, that's a story that's endured worldwide for many, many years. And everyone understands the story. So let's talk about how do you and I use stories day to day. First off, in business, you ought to be collecting stories. Become a story researcher, a hunter. Notice what happens day to day. When someone does something great for a customer, when the customer gives you a wonderful testimonial, when someone solves a big problem, someone handles a situation very well that's difficult to handle, make a story of that and share it with other people. Get your own team accustomed to sharing stories among themselves, and then the stories become part of your legacy, part of your organization's culture. For example, Nordstrom is a famous department store in the United States based in Seattle, Washington. I was once engaged to do a seminar for the Nordstrom team in Southern California. In preparation for that engagement, they gave me a copy of their company newsletter, The California Connection. And all it was photographs and stories of experiences people had had at work over the last few months. Then I asked them, "What is your management philosophy?" And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You know, how do you teach people to do their job well?" They said, "Oh, our management philosophy, as you asked, is use your own good judgment." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "We tell our people, when you face a situation you don't know what to do and you weren't trained for it, use your own good judgment." I said, "But isn't that dangerous? Because what if they don't have good judgment?" They said, "Oh, we teach them what good judgment is." I said, "How?" And they said, "Stories." And they showed me their newsletter. It was photographs of people that worked there, descriptions of the situations they had encountered, and an explanation of what they did and how it turned out. So with each story, it was them saying to the people that read that, "Here's what good judgment looks like at this job. Here's another, and here's another." Every month, the people couldn't wait to get their hands on the next newsletter because the newsletter was filled with stories about people they knew doing things with which they were familiar day to day. Every newsletter taught people better judgment when it came to making day-to-day decisions. So how do you tell stories? Well, first off, you've got to set the situation, the scene for the story itself. And I just did that with you. I just told you about being hired by Nordstrom and how I was talking with them and having a conversation. And did you notice that I was playing out the parts of that conversation? See, so you set the scene by describing what you're talking about. It was a little village, late at night. We had just pulled in. There was nobody on the street. And when we got out of the car, Now see, that was the beginning of a story. I didn't have a story to go with that. I just made that up as I was talking with you. But it drew you into the scene and you could see that something was happening. And there was a little bit of anticipation, right? Okay, as to what comes next. So the first thing is set the scene. Second thing is identify the players in the scene, the characters, the people or the parts in it. Third thing is clarify the challenge. What is it that's going on here? Then tell the story as to how it's resolved, and then draw a conclusion. Okay? So you set the scene, and I'll make this one up as we go along. And I'm doing this on camera without any preparation for that particular story. Late at night, pulled into the town, nobody on the street. As we got out of the car, we noticed everything was kind of dead for the night. But we were miles away from home, and we were running out of gas, and we knew we needed a place to stay. Now, I've just brought you into it, and it's we. Well, who is we? Is that me and my wife, me and several people, me and my kids? Is this an emergency? You know, in other words, as we go into that story, there are more things you need to know to understand what's really going on. And then I could identify that scenario, and you know what the challenge is. Here we're stuck and we're running out of gas. And I could say, for example, and then a light came on in one of the store windows. And we realized that somebody hadn't yet gone home for the night. And so as we went over there, this jolly gentleman walked out of the store and said, "Boy, you folks are up late tonight." And we said, "Yes, sir," and we're afraid that we're stuck. We're running out of gas and we'll have to stay here tonight. And he said, "Well, come on in and let's have a cup of tea and talk about this. Maybe I can help you find a place." Okay, that's the end of the story I'm making up. So take a look at what happened. I drew you into the scene. I identified the characters. I presented a challenge that they were dealing with. I resolved the challenge with the light coming on, right? And then I led you into the conversation, and you felt like, we're safe, right? So we had some kind of a resolution in that portion of that story. When you're telling a story, you could say to someone, "This is our product. As you know, it has this feature, this feature, this feature, this feature." Those are good features to have. But what that means to you is this. See, that's a magical phrase. What that means to you is this. That's where you're going to tell a story about how this feature of your product helps the person who's considering buying it. So whenever you've got a speech to give, the more points that you can illustrate with some form of a story like that, the better off you're going to be. Set the scene, identify the characters, identify the challenge and describe it, then tell the story of how it unfolds, resolve it, and draw a conclusion. One of the stories that I'm known for is the story of the acorn. An acorn is the seed of an oak tree. And one acorn in ancient times became a mighty oak tree. And that mighty oak tree produced thousands and thousands of other acorns. And many of those became oak trees as well, and produced millions upon millions of other acorns. And now the oak tree is the most common tree in the United States. Many of them are huge spreading trees that produce tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of acorns in a year. So every acorn is the seed, a beginning. And I chose the acorn as the metaphor for my book, The Acorn Principle, which is about understanding the seed within you. And it's also the symbol for my company. My company logo is an acorn with a person emerging from it, triumphantly. So this is a pewter acorn. I found a jeweler who makes these. And an acorn, if you think about it, has three parts. It has a stem that connects it to the tree. It has a cap that holds onto the seed until it's ready to grow by itself. And then it has the seed itself. So when you look at an acorn, you see the stem, the cap, and the seed. Well, to a large extent, that is past, present, and future. You see, the stem, connecting it to the tree, represents the legacy of all the people who came before you, who made you possible. Their genetic imprint, their DNA, was passed along to you. Many of the habit patterns, little personal movements and sounds that have shown up in you emerged from generations long ago. People carry the traits of their ancestors, but we're not exact copies of our ancestors. We are also the product of our own experience. So it's nurture and nature combined that determine who we are and what kind of person we become. So that stem represents that legacy that's come to you. The cap holds on to the seed until it's ready to grow by itself. So the cap represents your protectors, your role models, your parents, your guides, your teachers, people you admire. And when you're ready to grow on your own, that seed represents the potential that still lives within you and the potential that will show up in all future generations through the stem into their seed. Who you are makes a difference, not just now, but for the long term. So here is your acorn. Now, nurture your nature.